past 7 o'clock. I'd like to start our meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Please.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Thank you very much. I apologize for the late start. Several of our members, Ken Redden is in Florida, Barbara Hall's in Florida, and I know that Beth, I was with her this morning, I think she's ill according to the conversation she had with you.
Right.
Okay. So, and it appears there are no citizens here for citizens input. So I'd like to start with the Board of Selectmen and follow our agenda following the Board of Selectmen input to in fact discuss the schedule of meetings that the group has asked me to put forward for the remainder of this year up to our fall town meeting, and to finally approve the minutes of our February 9th meeting, which we have a quorum here, and so we're able to do that. So, a couple of things I'd just like to just start our meeting with. I want to thank you and welcome the board members that are here, and we're here to listen to both of you. This is a process that's been, obviously, as you well know, been put together by the originators of the charter, and as we've referred to in the year ending in 0, it's our time to take a look at it, make some recommendations, and listen to all the folks that have got roles to play within that charter. Is everything going okay? What would you do? How would, in fact, the charter apply in a different way if you see it appropriate? So I'll open it up for members of the committee to ask questions, or for you to ask questions of us. And we're here just to gather information. We're a recommendation committee that will put together a final report, and then from where we put the report, where we'll move it from there, we'll discuss in our final report and recommendation. So to that extent, then I would welcome anybody on the group to ask any specific questions that they may have thought of at this point. And if not, then I would also ask the two members of the board to work with this on a daily basis to make us privy to what's working and what might not be. So,
First of all, can I say something?
okay.
I'd just like
Okay.
to welcome you here and thank you for being on the committee. And we hope we can get a charter we can be proud of. And I know you'll work hard to get it done.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi.
Really, and I'm going to go around just to try to get some general questions out. You're just going to have me ask a specific question.
Mm-hmm.
My specific question really is, we're in a town manager form of government right now. We have been for 10 years. Really, is this the form of government that works in terms of your own service as a member of the Board of Selectmen? If not, what ways would need to be changed to work better?
Personally, I like the form of government as town manager. But I do have a piece of from Beth saying she'd want to look into the mayoral governmental system in the long-term ramifications of finance to it. And but I would rather stick with the town manager form of government.
Doesn't Mass General Law regulate mayoral?
No.
Yes.
No.
Yeah, there's section.
You can become, town of Braintree is a mayoral form of government.
Right, but doesn't it have population requirements and those?
It may be
12,000.
12,000.
Yeah,
Okay.
there is
which
a
would qualify.
restriction in Mass
Yeah.
General Law that says once you attain 12,000, and the reason I know this, and I want to thank you, Peter, I really openly want to preface some of my comments with a thank you for Peter, who I asked to do some baseline research, and he was an original member of this group, the Charter Commission, and he brought me all, and you were too, all the information, it goes all the way back to the 1988 Government Study Committee that was headed by Elton Jones, pre-charter, as to why we should form a charter. And from there, once the charter commissioners were elected, where they went with it and how they came together with their recommendations. And yes, that was part of the consideration in terms of some of the questions. Should it be a mayoral form of government? What are the requirements for that? One of the requirements is your population must be at least 12,000 inhabitants to be able to be considered for a mayoral form of government. That's
So
easy.
your question, though, or aside from just commenting about whether we could or couldn't, what are your opinions of the current form of government that we have?
I'm in favor of the town manager form of government. And one of the main reasons I've seen over this is my third year now on the board, is the knowledge that I think that the town manager position brings. As a selectman, I mean, we are citizens. I mean, our experience is varying, in life experience and in knowledge of government as general, even in knowledge of business. And often we're turning to the town manager for guidance on how the government should work, whether it's from regulation, whether it's from operation, even though we're the executive officers of the town, we're relying heavily on the town manager. And I think that is where we need that position to remain in a professional position, with criteria set for the hiring of a town manager based on their knowledge and expertise.
So that's, both of you have said that you like it right now.
Yes.
Are there any features about the current way the charter is devised, particularly around town manager, but even other spots where you think need revision?
Well, I would put in there, he can't come from Uxbridge. But he has to come from the state of Massachusetts.
You'd have a non-residency
Right.
requirement. Interesting. Okay.
Actually, I can.
So somebody who from town was a good candidate, you tell them they had to move out?
Well, no, I wouldn't tell them they had to move
Well,
out,
that's what a
but
non-residency
part of the
requirement
job.
does.
Right, it's part of the job.
And I think where Bruce is coming from in that is because that was one of the things that we had discussed when we actually hired the last town manager, whether or not we were going to require a residency requirement. I can see pros and cons to both sides of that. I mean, you can argue that, when they're a resident of their town, they're possibly more knowledgeable of what's going on in town. However, on the other side of the spectrum, I think that not being a resident of the town gives them an objective view, a less emotional impact on things that may be occurring in town, and bring some, won't say rational thinking always, but they have an objective opinion. They can look at it without being involved one way or the other, not having concerns over pressures of whether their neighbors are going to talk to them, or there's going to be an impact to their family based on decisions that they are making based on their best professional judgment.
Okay.
Interesting. Very Pat?
I've heard a lot lately, it reported from various members of the Board of Selectmen about the dysfunction on the Board of Selectmen. And not just that specific word, but I see some smiles, so you recall the dysfunction. And also, Cari, you've made comments that the Board of Selectmen may not be executing its job in certain areas with regard to the town manager of late. Is there anything in the charter that prevents you from functioning as a better unit? Is there anything that could be added to the charter that would ease tensions or burdens, or just make it flow better? Because this is not the first year we've heard how the board's dysfunctional, and I mean, we've heard it for many compositions of the board. So I'd just like to ask if either you think, is there something specific? I mean, this is a great opportunity to add, if we want to add, or is there something that ties your hands or ties the town manager's hands that prevents this form of government being as effective as it could be?
I think that one thing that potentially may be perceived as tying the town manager's hands is the over-involvement of the Board of Selectmen in the day-to-day operations of the business. When you have 5 individuals who, and I think it's good that they may have varying opinions on issues. I think that that's the whole intent of why you have a board, to bring different perspectives and for them to work it out. But when they are personally sharing those opinions with the town manager on what they think he should be doing daily, I think that puts the town manager in a very precarious situation because, depending on that individual, they may view the Board of Selectmen, rightfully so, as their boss. And how do you please 5 bosses? So I think that in that aspect, that's where it becomes a problem. Now, honestly, I don't know how the charter would address those because the charter already very clearly speaks to the fact that the Board of Selectmen are not to be involved in the day-to-day operation of the town.
And that the town manager, I believe it specifically says,
It's
day
his
to day.
responsibility.
They're the
Right.
ones.
So, having the charter already very clearly, in my opinion, addresses that. Now, how do you enforce the selectmen to follow the charter may be a direction that we should look at. What happens if you are violating the charter? What are the sanctions?
Well, would you think, though, hypothetically, we've discussed it, you brought up a mayoral form of government. If a mayor is elected in town by certain constituencies, that's kind of his boss too, or he won't be reelected.
Correct.
And so you have a constituency that elected you to represent their view. So do you think by having just one elected person that has a majority constituency would be better than having 5 people with different agendas?
I find that interesting.
I don't know. I mean, I think my concern would be with a mayoral position in a town the size of Uxbridge, that, again, would the mayor then feel that they can make the decision which is the best decision for the town overall, or would they be too easily persuaded by smaller citizen groups, kind of like a special interest groups? So would the town really be served by a strong number of vocal individuals similar to a special interest versus maybe in a larger town where a mayoral position may work better because you have a broader spectrum of citizens? I mean, that's my thought
autonomy
on
in
it.
that design, when we discussed the town manager's position in its initial draft, was that understanding of the depoliticalization of that position and the ability to efficiently function in a professional government environment. And I've seen this, and I'm sure everybody sitting at the table has seen this, where the political aspects of this position have been merged into this entire environment that really does not define the standing that the town manager has on both sides of the venue. If he doesn't step up to the political aspect of his job, which is, again, the public view, what people see and expect when they walk into his office, he gets chastised. Or when he doesn't live up to his government aspects, which are the day-to-day operations of the fire chief, the police chief, the public safety agencies, all of that financial aspect in maintaining government. And those lines have been blurred. They've been drawn to a point where that responsibility is just going back and forth like a yo-yo. And as we see this, we look at this accountability aspect of the town manager, the selectmen, and all of these different agencies that play into this role. Was it specifically designed when we hire people, and as we hire people, that we impart that kind of atmosphere where we talk about the politicalization of the job, when we talk about that functionality efficiently in government? And I'm not sure if that actually occurred or not. The charter, while in its intent, was pretty clear about that. But again, that accountability aspect. How do you hold each other accountable for staying within those roles? And I think that's kind of the scope of what I'm curious about.
You know, and I think that we've seen a good example, you know, and of course this is my opinion only, but in the last year, I think we saw how that push-pull occurred. From my opinion, the town manager on the school issue took the position that I'm objective. I don't live here in town. I'm going to look at it from what is the best. I'm going to look at what, both sides of it and give a perspective from both sides. Basically not picking a pro or a con. I'm going to look at and provide you guidance as you ask me questions, not based on the outcome, because I don't have a horse in this race.
From a personal experience.
Right, exactly.
From a board experience, do you think we've walked that same walk?
From a board experience, no, and I think that that's where, as elected officials, that's where the difference can come in that there were 5 members of that board that, because we came in at different times, we came in by constituents based on different needs, and therefore I think that we had a representation on the board that was representative of citizens of a whole, not of one particular group altogether.
So do you think that this is a maturity issue with the board, or is it an institutional knowledge, or what do you think is really driving this?
Out of those choices of words, I'd say a maturity issue. From my perspective, that's how I saw it happening this summer is, right after or around the time when the school was very contentious in the late spring, there were times where, statements were said that were not very mature over, current elections coming up.
When I talk about maturity,
it's
job maturity. It's knowing what your role is in place.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
And what the town manager's job is, and his maturity.
Well, this town manager has been pulled in different directions.
I think really from when the charter went in, I think there was not a time where the town manager has really been allowed to do the day-to-day. So what concerns me as to what we have in the charter, you're right, Cari, it hasn't been being followed. Do we need to modify this or make the changes within the board? For example, maybe the communications, and I don't know how you word this in the charter, between the town manager and the board is through the chair only, as a policy-making board. But I don't think it's just been the last year. I think it's been really from the institution of the charter that I think Mr. Klepper and Joe Myers had the same problems throughout their tenures here as well.
And that may be a way to look at it. Through my discussions, and I'll speak particularly with the current town manager, his perspective has been that he is to follow the direction of the chair. However, what has occurred with our board is that the direction of the chair has not been a vetted process with the board. So when the chair has been speaking to the town manager, it's not an opinion that has come before the board and the board has weighed in and said, now go back to the town manager and relay this direction. It's been, the chair's position is the same as myself or Bruce walking in and saying something. But from the position of the town manager looking at it, from his experience in any place else, when the chair speaks, that should be given greater weight than any of the other members because it is the chair. Not understanding that, no, the chair's position in this case is no different than any other selectman's position. And so it's caused conflict.
I think that's been a problem right along.
I thought with this, what I'm wondering, and it used to be that when people became selectmen, they had served on other boards. 3 members of your board have only been on the Board of Selectmen. Do you think it would be something to consider that maybe we make an additional requirement of somebody running for the Board of Selectmen, that maybe they've served the town in some other elected capacity?
That may be something that
I've been on 2 or 3 boards, and you do get to know more
Well-
people in town. You get to, you get to
Well,
know
it's
the,
not
not
just
even knowing
the
the people,
people.
it's the functioning of the town.
and it's the process and how the departments, I can see where that would be, and understand just even how the government works. If you're coming into this position as an elected official who has had no experience in any form of town government, whether it be sitting on a committee or a subcommittee, then just to understand the rules of procedure, to understand the function of the chair, the vice chair, you're at a disadvantage. You really are, because when you come in as a selectman, and I don't know what you all's experience was, but you're handed the selectman handbook, and it's like birth by fire. It's like, okay, show up the first day and just, you hit the ground running, and, you're definitely, you're not even required to go in these
You get a
seminars.
really big salary, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's all for that
That's what
money.
government's all about,
You know,
and
To the
that's,
point, though, again, we're not really, for our part, really discussing things tonight, but I will say that I wouldn't support Jim's position on this, and only not because I don't think that way.
I
but
didn't say it was a
no,
position.
No,
I said it was a-
But not that I don't think that way when I vote. When I vote, I may look at a candidate based on other experience. But when we have a country in which anyone can run for anything, Mitt Romney, most people would consider, whatever side of the aisle you're on, was a pretty reasonable governor. He had never served an elected office. So I would be very, very leery about those kind of requirements, but I appreciate the sentiment.
And that's a good point that you raise. We even in our last elections, we've seen individuals that have run for Senate and legislative seats that have just come out of the middle of nowhere, right, and don't have any type of experience.
America.
Definitely,
one
right,
of the
exactly.
things that we looked at,
It's
again,
America.
when we talked about this town manager, if I could just, ultimately, it's the continuity of change. That's the environment that we're in right now. The continuity of change has not been acceptable by a number of people in perception. Is it a reality on the learning curve from a lot of people, both the town manager and the Board of Selectmen? Yeah, we dealt that hand. Ultimately, we have to deal with that hand. Some people are going to learn, and I believe that that's truly the case. But when we looked at the job description of the town manager in the charter, and the authority that's vested in him, and how that was assembled in his contract, and how that discussion unfolded in your hiring process, and how you further refined that, do you feel that there is an issue within that contract that may need to be introduced to the charter? Several forms. One, you could talk about an outside committee who's actually the hiring committee, and/or an appointed committee to review the town manager outside of the function that you serve as his direct supervisors, or that caveat as it exists in the description of the charter. that autonomy aspect of it seems to be very conflicting at the moment. And when you drafted his contract, his current contract,
We did
I take it was just a reflection of what was in the charter.
Yes and no. As far as the job description, we pulled directly from the charter. Honestly, looking back and reading the contract just recently, and looking at it from a different perspective than I did when we drafted it a year and a half, well, 2 years ago now, I took pause with some of the things that we wrote in there, honestly. You know, from the perspective that that contract was actually drafted. I think that it would have been a good idea, and I don't recall whether we did. Bruce, do you remember even if we ran it by town council?
No, we didn't. No, we didn't.
I mean, because I'm looking at some of the legal language or the lack thereof, and so, you know.
So you're basically
So,
saying that is problematic.
I think that
and
the
it's variable
contract we
based
drafted,
on-
however, the actual hiring of him in the process, no, I don't see a problem with what we did. I think that going through with the decision that the board made at that time, I think that we made the right decision on handling the hiring of this town manager ourselves. I think that that's something that we should take great pride in what we did in that 6-month period. I mean, we had the former town manager leaving on a Friday, and we had this town manager starting on a Monday, and we did it without an interim. We did it without any additional cost to the town for searches. We had a large pool to choose from. We went through the interviews. We felt that we very well vetted that out, and we even had 2 very viable candidates. It was a hard decision in picking Mr. Slozak over the other top-rated candidate.
But
Well, just, maybe you're gonna go to the same place, but on the selection process, the charter is confusing. The charter does not make a real clear delineation about what happens after the first town manager is hired. That's one thing that this, I think in my view, this commission clearly has to add language to the charter that either says every town manager vacancy is filled by use of a search committee with some kind of design to that, or the board of selectmen, now that the first town manager's been hired, you know, been here, been gone, that it's the board of selectmen's purview. This charter is not clear on that.
In this charter, it says the Board of Selectmen.
What's that?
Board of Selectmen.
It's not entirely clear about how the process goes.
That's what I got out of it.
No, the supervision of the town manager is the board of
No,
selectmen.
I'm talking about the hiring process.
It's not
He
clear.
was hired.
We looked at that last time. we-
Oh, when you're doing that,
Yeah.
at the same time, make sure these things are televised, the interviews.
Yeah, this is what we're being taped right now.
No, that's what I'm just suggesting, that the next town manager gets
Also,
hired,
for the interview
the
process.
interviewing process gets televised.
In any case, the question of how it's supposed to happen is not entirely clear in the charter.
how do you feel, Bruce, about having an outside committee or an outside process for the Board of Selectmen for selection?
I'm not entirely against it, but we're the ones that are gonna have to work with them. So I think, a majority of, 2 or 3 selectmen should be on that committee anyway, because they're the ones gonna have to work with them. And, knowing them and picking them, I thought we did a good job when we picked Mike. And I'll still say it now. It's our fault that the contract is messed up, not Mike's. It's our fault. We didn't follow it.
Well, ultimately, I wouldn't call it a fault, it's a perception. And again, those perceptions change and they vary with people who are involved. And I think it's, when we talk about transitional issues, I mean, the maturity that exists in institutional knowledge is pretty low. And unfortunately, we're looking at saying, and every one of us sitting here is probably saying, is there a device that we can use to maintain a level of maturity, institutional knowledge, and keep that in place so that when these changes take place, they're not as traumatic as we might be currently experiencing.
You Cari, and to the having some outside people help select the manager in that process. You know, that's the first thing you identified, is that the town manager has 5 bosses, seemingly, you know, and you have 5 constituencies that elected you, and you. And would it help alleviate that problem by having the town manager not be solely hired by what is perceived by you to be his 5 bosses?
No, because I look at it. In the whole process, I mean, I agree with Bruce in the sense that he is working for us, and there's a big part of the selectman town manager dynamics that falls to personality. It really does. And, you know, and I think we've all been in a working environment where if you may not always agree with your employees or your bosses, but if there is a personal dynamic there that just clashes from the beginning, it just seems like, you know, it's going to be very difficult to overcome that. And I think that when your town manager first comes in, even though the members of the board are rotating for a sense, at least at that time for that first year, in the, you know, the town manager coming in and learning about the town and learning, you know, getting their feet wet in it, I think that it's important to have that that cohesiveness between at least feeling like this is the person we want to work with. Now, whether or not after that first year, and I think that's one of the reasons why we only wanted a 1-year contract initially to start with, and I myself was greatly pushed for that, is we're going to know pretty short into this relationship whether or not our instincts during that interview for this one being the right fit for this town is there. And I guess I'll say it's not just the personality and the relationship between the board and the town manager, but it's with each of our different perspectives on what we felt the town of Uxbridge needed. We looked at that as a whole, you know, because
well, don't you think that's always going to be the case? And it's always been the case in, you know, our short history of the town managers. We've had 3 and an interim, is that right?
Right.
And from my perspective, they've been really all different, and they've had very different relationships with boards. And I mean, are we trying to roll that out to get maybe not the extremes, if that's a perception, or to give assistance to the Board of Selectmen, you know, by an outside committee? I mean, including, you know, members of the board.
I agree.
I'd like to take it in a somewhat different place too that I'm hearing, and I'm hearing 2 things that worry me. One thing that's coming right back to mind quickly, and the other one, my age is bothering me a little bit here. The first thing is that I keep hearing you say, Cari, that that the person has to work with the board. As a practical matter, I'm not disputing that at all. But the concept of the charter is the town manager is working for the town. The Board of Selectmen really got a nuance. At any point, you know, even apart from the fact that there are elections every 3 years, the board changes because people resign. People get sick, they leave, whatever. So the board changes all the time. The idea of a town manager is to have stability across transitions on the Board of Selectmen, so that the town manager isn't supposed to be in more trouble or less trouble, or more efficient or less efficient, or more well-liked or less well-liked every single time there's an election. The town manager is supposed to be the person that the town is trusting to provide professional leadership and management for a period of time. And in towns where the town manager form of government has worked, town managers have outlasted many, many, many boards of selectmen. And that, in my view, is as it should be. So I'm real concerned about anything that has to do with the personality. Not because, no, I didn't live it, I lived it too, you lived it. So it's not out of naivety that I'm saying I'm disturbed by it. But there is a point where I served on the charter after 2 terms of the selectmen and before 1 more last term on the Board of Selectmen. My interest in the charter was for the town to be managed differently than it was during my first 2 terms. And I have to tell you, my feeling is that really hasn't transpired.
You know, and I appreciate you bringing up it because that is a good point. And I think that when I say get along with the board, it wasn't my personal interaction with the town manager. Because, I mean, honestly, he wasn't my first choice, in our voting process, and, everyone knows that because it was all taped. I mean, it was, this was, as I saw, what would work best with all the department heads. And it was also based, and we did have all the department heads interview the town manager. And they all had, input into which of the last two candidates we actually went with.
Mm-hmm.
And we went with the candidate also that not only the majority of the board wanted, but that the department heads wanted. It wasn't one of these situations where, we went against what the department heads were recommending. And I appreciate you bringing that up because you're right. I mean, the department heads are the longevity. They're the ones that are going to be here, hopefully 2-3 years from now, and they were here 2-3 years past. So they are outliving the board. But we looked at not just our input, but also the individuals that were going to be working directly with him in this process. So I think that's important to point out.
I'll probably take that too far away from you.
No, that's.
One observation I have is I've observed this process from the inception of when we put the charter in place to watching the 3 town managers perform. The question I have of both of you is this. Is this really a charter issue? Or is it really a communication and cooperation, goal-setting process that is the board engaging in, as in Mike's contract specifically? And I think the section in the town manager of the charter is the most pressing issue, in my opinion, as to the rationale behind why this town adopted the charter. The old saying was, and I've asked almost every member of the original charter committee, why did we even embark in this direction? The cliche was, how can you run a $32 million organization with 5 part-time folks that perhaps don't have the depth of knowledge required to run the organization? I then stepped back and I said, well, is it a charter issue in the framers? And just shaking your head.
No, it's not.
Is it a cooperation and communication issue in the goal-setting process, which
Yes.
are mutually agreed upon?
Yes.
Between the chair representing the body politic of the Board of Selectmen in concert with mutually agreed upon goals between the town manager, the reasonable, attainable, and doable within the parameters you set forth as a board.
Well, that's our problem right now. That is our problem.
Would you
You just said our problem right there.
Because I want to
That's our whole problem.
Yeah, I want to cut to the chase because I've lived that too. And frankly, I can say that with some validity. I had to be the chairman of the board when we let the first town manager go. I was the chairman of the board when we hired the second town manager. And we engaged in an outside process put on by Mark Morse, MMA. You and I were on the board at the time. We unanimously voted. And Mary Pat, you were on the FinCom when we came to you asking for that. I came for the $12,000 appropriation to take the politics out of it. To really put in a non-political component into a selection process and engage everyone in that process outside of the hot issues that were going on. And you reflected upon that a little bit, Cari.
You know what's interesting what you're saying there? When my perception was when we hired this town manager, there was no politics involved in the hiring of this town manager. Whether or not his contract is renewed is a whole different ballgame. I think that there's a lot of politics and a lot of push-pull going on around whether or not we are going to retain him. But as far as the hiring process, I don't see where politics
No.
played any
There
part
was none.
in the Board of Selectmen choosing the town manager.
You did a good job with that. I observed that process. I watched every meeting. I watched every single meeting that you guys had. And I want to be as complimentary as I can be to when people do the right job and the right results come. I think you did an excellent job as a board in that process. Just
Thank
my
you.
opinion. But I want to view it from the point of view, was it the charter that helped you through that process, or was it that you that all went about it in a way that knew what you were looking for, and then subsequent to that, put together achievable goals and objectives to help the town manager succeed, so that the board looks good, the town manager looks good, and the town feels real good about where you collectively are pulling the community in concert with the charter. And that's a long question or an observation, but
Oh, the selection process we had, I thought was great. It turned out fantastic. But the actual workings, when you get down to the board level, you know, is this town manager gonna get a review? That he was due a review in I think October, but it was never brought. Well, it was brought up, but it was never attacked. You know,
So we're getting to the
we're still
heart of it.
fooling around with his goals 2 weeks ago.
and we're not here to critique how you guys are working with the town manager, but more importantly, you just hit something that I think is real important to why we should or should not either amend the charter, make recommendations to amend it, because we can't amend it, we only have the power of recommendation. But in looking at the town manager's contract, which you both made reference to, and I've read it in the entirety and looked at section 6, and I looked at the town manager evaluation from A, B, and C, would you both agree that A, B, and C, either one of those sections that we've had discussion on, have been rightfully fulfilled from your executive point of view to what the charter folks expected out of this? And just to,
Right.
I mean, I
believe
want to
it's
put you on the
B.
spot because it's important. It really is important.
The ordering of them, I think that isn't, you know, because it's kind of like a circle, but I think C should be kind of at the top, because it said it shall be mutually agreed upon the town manager, provide an evaluation form. Well, when we renewed this contract back in June, we had developed an evaluation form and we had provided, you know, he knew what the evaluation form was. So the way that this is laid out, we're to give him the evaluation form and do it within 30 days of restart of his employment. So it's kind of like, well, C should be A, and then you go down the list and then you come back up again. So in that sense, I think that we did fulfill C back in June.
Okay.
You know, he was evaluated before the board changed in May. Actually, technically it was May. Under the previous of the board, when it was still Mr. Pataski and Mr. Kuros, we did see. We gave him his evaluation 30 days before when we were renewing his contract.
Okay.
Okay? Then, since then, we have not fulfilled, definitely have not fulfilled B,
No.
the semi-annual. We did not
Semi-annual
do.
review, which was designed to take place in November.
Correct.
Right.
And we did not do A, which was to set the goals. Said
still
goals and
missing.
objectives shall be incorporated here in a reference there. We didn't do that.
No.
So is it reasonable then to assume that where his contract hasn't been followed and the intent of the original charter commission was to have a town manager form of government with the chief executive officers fulfilling a role that not only hired, but in fact, to your point, Bill, that works collaboratively with them and clearly has to define the day-to-day operations, who handles the day-to-day, who handles the greater portion of the vision of your regard. Has that all been okay with both of you folks?
I can't say I'm pleased with the day-to-day operation with the selectmen. Like, I come in a lot, but I don't tell them what to do. I might take a ride with them or something like that, go to look at something, some problem somewhere.
Well, you hit on something there. You said you're not pleased with the day-to-day operations of the selectmen. The selectmen shouldn't have day-to-day operations.
Well, that's part of the problem. That's part of the problem. Some are telling them what to do. Or, you know, and it's just, the chair's gotta be the main focus. The communicator. The chair's gotta be the communicator.
And is that being done presently?
No,
Is the charter gonna fix that?
no,
If we were to put something in the charter
No.
to fix that?
charter will fix that.
So,
Yeah, I mean, this might be a matter of board governance, which is something that any group of 5 people need to figure out. I do want to ask a side question, just to throw it out there. I think it relates a little bit. And some of us have been around a long time, and we remember this town being a 3-person board of selectmen. And depending on how our memory serves us, we may remember that one member was sick for a while, and for a time the board had to operate as 2 members. And depending on people's points of view or side of the aisle or whatever, either things worked famously well when there were 2 members or didn't work well. So out of that came the desire to switch from a 3-person board to a 5-person board. With a town manager form of government, should the charter 10 years ago, or should the recommendation of this commission be that the board be reduced from 5 to 3? And to what degree do you think that would have a beneficial effect or negative effect on the kind of problem that you guys are referencing relative to the day-to-day operations?
I think the board should stay at 5. Because if you stay at 3 and 2 people don't get along, well, 2 people get along and 1 doesn't, then you always got your vote one way. Being at 5, you know, 3 of them can go do the same thing, but once in a while you can change your mind. But having it at 3, I think you're really hurting the town more than you're helping the town.
I mean, well, I guess what's concerning me, and the reason why for the question, I mean, I would have asked it anyway, but certainly hearing, you know, a couple times a reference to 5 bosses. It's feeling particularly unwieldy.
And is the 5 bosses maturity, personality, just the times, you know, and the lack of experience, but then the great experience that are on the board? I mean, there's both on your current board.
I think you hit on one thing there, maturity, but we keep focusing on the maturity of the board. The maturity of the town manager would be another issue of this, and a strong town manager would take care of this problem, because they wouldn't do what they're doing. So,
I think the first town manager that came in tried to assert that it was his responsibility for the day-to-day, and I think
yeah,
that was a contentious issue back then as well. And you kind of expected that in the initial, I think, an initial turnover from one form of government to another, that there's going to be some feeling out.
but I think it's maturity on both sides, and we've seen a wide range of town managers. You know, and Alan Klepper, like, you know, Bill said, he micromanaged to the max. And Jill brought something else, and Mike brings something else. But, you know, I think we're only looking at the board side of this maturity issue. I think the town manager plays a role in this also.
So,
Just for the record, I'm not comfortable with using maturity as a way of.
Well,
I would
yeah,
I'd rather see us talk about, you know,
It's
finesse
not-
and
it's-
collaboration.
yeah, Artie, you're
Because I
missing,
used to
it's
train
not,
No, no,
a
I
10-year-old
don't-
boy.
it's not maturity as a,
That's-
it's not maturity of the individual, it's maturity of the position.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's still young.
It is.
Your position, Cari?
You know, a couple of things. You know, I think that it may be helpful to have language in the charter that provides the tool and the guidance for direction with whether it be a hiring of a future town manager, or when it comes to the contract of the town manager. Not so stringent that it handicaps or handcuffs, the Board of Selectmen into, well, this is the only thing that we can do, but that provides a direction for when you do have these points where you could have a board that is not as knowledgeable as maybe a prior board. Like we said, it appeared that the politics were not involved in the hiring of this town manager. As a board, I think that we worked well together under the previous board.
If I could just back you up, I was
Sure.
about the 5 and 3.
Oh, I'm sorry, on the 5 and 3. Okay, on the 5 and 3, I think that my only concern with going to I think I prefer to stay with a 5-member board. I agree that a 3-member board, given the size of the town, having the representation, I think that a 5-member board, we're almost coming to the size where it could be argued that we should have representative form of town government. And I'd rather see the town stay on town meeting form of government with a larger possibility for constituents to be represented on the board than to actually go to a representative form of town government. I think that that's probably one of the most important reasons why Uxbridge should have a 5-person Board of Selectmen. However, my concern is that we're not pulling the individuals that would be best, that may be better off as selectmen in our town to run for this.
Well, if you look at the realistic
position.
aspect of it, a committee of 5 is going to be belated in discussion. It certainly prolongs the process, no matter how you look at it. Given the scope of the responsibilities of the Board of Selectmen and the town manager, and both of these as it reflects in the charter and by statutory authority, do you feel that the board is hindered by its inability to make decisions quickly in relation to that town manager's position? In other words, are you efficiently enough functioning in your 5-member status with the amount of time it takes for deliberation to effectively run government?
We aren't, but that's only by our own doing. That's not because of a makeup of 5. When we want to make a decision, we do.
Can I add one thing? I don't mean to interrupt you.
No problem.
One thing you people need to remember, this school issue has torn this board to pieces. Has torn this board to pieces. That's one thing you might want to think about when you're thinking about making changes. We're in a unique situation right here where we've had a school issue, we've had some important votes, and it's really torn us apart.
And I want to, both people, credence of the reality of what you're saying, but also remind you that the tearing the town apart.
Not the town, I said the board.
But the board's apart relative to the school issue is about 20 years old. So it's been, that has been the backdrop of every single board of selectmen for the last.
Yeah, but we're
20
doing
years.
it. We're doing it.
Harry, did you and I do
I
it?
think,
we do it?
Adi made a great point at the beginning of our
We did.
last meeting in reference to that. And frankly, no one can speak, I think, with more position on that issue than myself. Frankly, that's why I'm so happy to be sitting here, because it really doesn't matter where we've been. It doesn't matter the problem we've experienced. It ultimately matters where are we going to go. And this is such a unique opportunity to have this charter review taking place at this time, when frankly the last couple of Board of Selectmen meetings we've watched and wrestling with the process of whether we should rehire the town manager, faced with the greatest project that we have in the history of this community facing us, and all the other problems that we're experiencing, not unlike any other community right now. Leadership needs to surface at its best. This is all coming together at a perfect time. I believe it is the perfect storm. And I believe this is the committee that wants to help move this cheese forward, if you will, in such a way that says, how do we get the input from you folks and every other person that's in this charter, appointed, anointed, elected, that has something to do with this process, to help them to make a better document or a better working relationship with? We will always have these problems. As long as we have people here in different opinions, in different positions, every selectman and every person that goes on the board goes on with an agenda. They disguise it with performance afterwards, in a sense. In fact, remember you reminded me time and time again, is it smoke and mirrors? What is it? Well, let's talk about what it is.
Well, I'm just telling you what,
You know?
what has pulled this board kind of
And I agree.
unjelled it.
But I'm saying we've all had that
Right.
challenge.
But essentially, if
We're not done.
But think about this, Bruce. This is an observation. If in fact we had a board, or any board, that had clearly defined goals and objectives, mutually agreed upon by the board, whether it's a unanimous vote, 3 votes or 4, that set the chairman in motion to work collaboratively with the town manager and periodically review and update these goals and make sure they're reasonable in relationship to financial matters and end result. Would we be better off because we have a charter? Would we be better off if we said, as some folks have said, get rid of the charter completely? Because the charter's not helping us. What is it specifically about the charter that isn't helping you folks make these chief executive decisions in a way that work in concert with the charter as well as the net result we're looking to achieve? Is there something here that's impeding you?
No.
Okay. Is there anything here that if you could produce your ideal document that says, this is my town, I am the chief executive officer, I would do this if I were able to do that, what would that be? If anything.
I don't think there's anything you can put in that piece of paper that is going to make, it's kind of like, you know, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. It doesn't matter what you put in that document if the individuals are not going to rely on the tools that they currently have to use. It doesn't matter how many more tools you put in front of them. I mean,
Would it help if, you know, it's very specific for what the town manager is supposed to do, the day-to-day operations. Would it help if it was more specific about what the Board of Selectmen is not to do? The Board of Selectmen is not to be involved in the day-to-day running of the town? Things like that.
It won't hurt.
well,
I mean, just to...
but
That's
in
a
my
good one.
opinion, but that's what the charter says. You know, we're not, doesn't it specifically say we are not to be involved in the day-to-day operations?
This is day-to-day administration.
Right, okay, so, I mean, it tells us not to do it. Now, maybe in that, if you would like to define further exactly what that means, you know, so therefore you will not, you know, tell the town manager who to hire, you will not, you know, exercise political control, you will, I mean, is that what they mean by the definition?
And actually, I mean, maybe that is a point, because the specific wording says, provided, however, nothing in this section shall be construed to authorize any member of the Board of Selectmen nor a majority of such members to become involved in the day-to-day administration of any town agency. That doesn't preclude you from doing it.
That's right.
It doesn't authorize you, but it doesn't preclude
That's
you.
right.
So maybe something
It's
along
worthy
the
of-
square
it's
of
worthy
word.
of further discussion, sir.
Yeah,
That's an excellent point, Mayor Pat, because it almost goes to the point where if the town manager is hiring somebody to run a department or whatever position they're gonna have at the town, absent a clearly defined job description, how do you explain the role to that person? Unless you clearly define what your expectation is, how their performance will be, you know, related to whatever compensation they're gonna receive. You see, I guess when we get to the executive level, and we rely probably on some common sense and some things that we expect that any reasonable executive might bring, then we get too broad. We make too many assumptions, and we don't clearly define the roles. Perhaps maybe a clearly defined role, not only responsibly, But if there's gonna be accountability and responsibility, then the equation has to bring back, if you're accountable for it, you're responsible for it, and the net result, you won. So how do we help you through this charter to make sure that that happens? Because we gotta get in a better place. And how can we do that for you?
Well, looking back on when we were drafting the evaluation form, because we did change the evaluation form. I don't know how it changed from Klepper to Myers, but from Myers to Slozak, we changed the form. And we used samplings from other towns, and we just picked what we thought from that. But in raising this issue, what then, is that something that the charter wants to set in stone? This is how the town manager should be evaluated, and take that responsibility off of the board from changing the actual evaluation. Because the evaluation form is separate from the goals. They're to be evaluated on the goals, and the goals are going to change from year to year depending on the priorities of the town. But the form itself, should it really change? I mean, that's a
real interesting observation, because like everything in the charter, there's no rules for if you don't enforce the charter. There's nothing that says that if you don't do this, the charter speaks to this is, in a sense, the penalty for not doing it. The penalty is non-performance, and the fact is we're hiring we're renting their behavior through hiring process, so if they don't perform well, the penalty is not renewal of their contract, or not renewal of an elected official's election. But
is that enough?
Yeah, exactly. So when you look at it, how do we change that behavior to not only build in the hiring process of the town manager, that the expectations are clearly there, the job description between the selectmen and the town manager clearly defined, and from the get-go, everyone knows exactly what they're gonna do, what their resources are to succeed, and how this is gonna be measured along the way. Does it mean bringing together maybe a committee that says, the charter speaks to, are we gonna have a review committee that in fact, at the end of the town manager process is gonna review very objectively, non-politically, the results? What are the measuring rods for the results? How do we really clearly actually make that determination? Just an observation.
Yeah, see, I think one thing we need to be careful about, if you remember, this is only our second meeting, and we're not really supposed to decide all these major
Oh, we're not
questions
deciding.
in the universe tonight. But because, at the same time, I'm hearing the notion of standardization and how important that can be, and how valuable it can be. I also want to make sure that I, again, make it clear that we are here on the side of democracy, and very truly, every year, the town has the right, by virtue of going to the ballot box, to change the direction of the town at least a little bit. And out of every 3 years, they get to change it by electing 2 people. Once every 3 years, they get cheated and they only get to elect 1. But when people decide which candidate they're going to support, they are looking at the total picture of town government with the hope that a change in the board of selectmen might make a difference. So we need to be careful as we standardize, and we make it very clear that we expect a newly configured board every May to have a different feel. And that's why we have elections. So it's, there's a balance here.
And that's
When
gonna
you look
happen.
at society today, we demand immediate results. We have cell phones, we can have communication instantaneously, and we demand immediate results. The transition that you're talking about, and that whole comfort zone of cooperation and communication, is a long-term process. If you have an immediate problem, there is no device within this system to deal with that specifically. And there really isn't. There's no compliance aspect. I'm going to ask both of you how you feel on the position of a recall and that being incorporated into the charter.
You know, it's interesting that you bring that up because in the time I've been here in Uxbridge, what I've seen, that they've tried to recall a hired employee, right? A vote of no confidence has come before the town. We've had a selectman who's been asked to resign. We've had a member of the school committee who's been asked to resign. We've had individuals who have on their own have resigned from boards because of, you know, for varying reasons, whether or not, you know, I think that it's something that the charter should look at. Not to be used as a tool for political reasons, and I think that that's why it's important, is that because before I ran for the Board of Selectmen, I myself thought, wow, you know, I used to watch the meetings and think, wow, you know, I have a lot of respect for those.
I've been watching these meetings. Is that what you're thinking?
I'm sorry, what? I don't have a life. Yeah, that's true.
Gary, that's what you should have been thinking.
But you know, I'd be like, you know, wow, you know, you go to, you know, wow, that's a selectman. I mean, they're a big shot in town. You know, not in the sense of popular, but you know, those are the individuals that are running my town. I have the utmost respect, and I should have the utmost faith in those individuals, in what they're doing. And for that, you know, and I think we've seen it in the political spectrum of all, you know, you're held to a higher standard. And therefore, you know, you don't run for these positions if you don't expect to, you know, have to have a little bit more decorum than maybe the average citizen. You know, and for that reason, I think that individuals should feel that if that individual is not living up to that level of respect or that level of holding that title, then there is a fair way and process for that to be vetted. And I don't think it should be through the system of peers in this case. I think that it needs to be a non-partial, non-political, you know, place that it can actually be ascertained, is there a serious violation that has occurred where this individual we don't want holding this important title in our town anymore.
Do you think there's another way of doing that beyond the scope of an election, which is a highly charged political environment?
I guess I don't, you mean instead of just leaving it to the citizens?
Well, if you talked about this removal process, I mean,
Right.
you're talking about a language issue where you place a vested authority in charge of that process, or is it?
I think, I'm very much for the recall. Very much for it. So I know my responsibilities. If I go out there and do something that's really not right, I'll walk in there tomorrow and resign. I'll resign that night.
But not all individuals
Not
share the
all
same.
individuals will do that.
Is the recall handled in any other area? Bylaws or mass general laws?
We don't have, no, there's a lot,
Different
none
towns
of
have
towns
it.
There's
have
several different
recalls.
ways that you could manage recalls, but once again, you know, it's. I'm just curious as to whether the thought process that compliance aspect has to be put in place, that we need to look at something along that venue that would, and if you feel that that's necessary from prior experience, where you're saying that we've had problems with town officials where there has been no device to discharge other than what would have been traditionally considered a recall, that they've gone on their own graces,
Well, you know, and maybe it's a situation of both. For instance, like, you know, we have a process, because a recall is an election. It gets to the town vote. Well, we have a process to get to a town vote. You know, maybe it's a combination of the two. That if there's a situation where it could warrant a recall, it goes to a review board that then has to vote, and if they vote, then it goes to a recall, and if it passes at a recall, the person's out. if it, you know, if they don't get the votes at the recall, the majority of the citizens don't overturn that position, then they're not out. You know, kind of along the lines of an election, exactly. You know, and so it would be a process where, you know, you know, an allegation is brought forward, it's investigated by, you know, a nonpartisan board, and then they determine this could, you know, this meets the category for putting before the citizens a recall. And then it goes to the recall, and then if 50% of the citizens say, we don't want you in that seat anymore, then you're out, and then we'll hold another general election.
So how does somebody get on a recall panel?
You could have that as elected officials from the town.
So
So it's political.
So you,
Being on a recall panel is political.
Or you can have the town manager appointment.
but you are in favor of an accountability aspect being
Yes.
incorporated.
And if it's
Yes.
elected, how do you
That's-
recall somebody from the recall panel?
Actually, you
all.
make a good
Very
point there.
simple.
Yeah.
Then you have it as a town manager appointment.
I think one of
To
the
the recall
observations is that there are communities that have, to your question, Mary Pat, recall provisions built into their bylaws, and they're very explicit in terms of what needs to be done in terms of number of signatures, percentages, and I don't want to say, I don't want to generalize.
Usually it's a walk around.
Exactly. And
I'm sorry,
it's
it's
pretty
Usually it's a
obvious.
walk around, get signatures.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
gotta
Some-
get-
Some towns might have.
But isn't that
threshold.
political
Right.
too?
No, no, it
Yeah.
wasn't. I'm just
That's-
Right.
saying
Yeah,
how most
yeah.
towns do it. Most towns don't have a recall panel.
Right,
They have
right. And I think that
people walking around to the coffee shops.
if a recall, if we're gonna go in that direction, I think we need to really think about, is this something the charter ought to be taking a look at, or is it, is a bylaw outside of the charter that may be more extensive review has to take place? I just.
If you want to go back to the school issue,
Yeah.
this is totally hypothetical, but some imaginary person named Harry,
Right.
and some imaginary person named Art could have at any given Tuesday morning had papers being passed around the coffee shops to get rid of us.
We did have,
Yeah, so.
and there's a couple of other imaginary people.
So you're
that
saying
got-
it's not an efficient process?
Yeah,
Art?
yeah.
What's the, we gotta
It became
define it
very
better?
unofficial until it almost became official.
Yeah.
And, but no,
Just,
you're absolutely
just
right.
know that it's definitely a double-edged sword.
No question.
It has a lot of merit in some of the kind of concerns that you're voicing, but it also, in some towns, has become a circus.
Right, and for that reason, I mean, is that where, you know, the idea of having it go before, you know, I kind of, I guess, look at the review committee as kind of like a jury, you know? And maybe it's that situation where we run it as a jury pool. An issue has come up, an advisory committee needs to be drafted, and they take all the names of all the registered voters in town, and they pull your name out of the hat, and guess what? As soon as we have 10 people to fill, that's our advisory committee that's gonna review whether or not this is gonna go to recall vote.
And what our role is here is, as I see it, is not to discredit any idea. We're an exploratory committee. We're asking for as much input as we can get. I think there's no bad idea. It's a matter of, once we take all through this entire process, all the folks, all the way up till September, and then we go into our deliberation and formulating the final recommendations, only then I think will we have a pretty good idea of collectively gathering all the folks. Because everyone's, I think, experiencing the same kind of problems as you guys are, but you guys are in the captaincy.
Mr. Chairman, can I,
Yes.
because I have short-term memory loss.
Really? Your age?
You know, and it's a great point that you make, Cari, that, we have this whole agenda of the schedule of people and what's, if you don't know, on September 7th,
We come back here, don't we?
Yeah, which gives you a great time period to listen to everything else in between, and then,
Don't come back before.
it's 15
We get some
minutes
more
every
people.
week.
I watch the shows, I have nothing else to do.
But I was wondering, my experience on the finance committee, to that particular, thinking of the finance committee, especially their role with reviewing the warrant and for town meeting, Is there any sort of conflict or are you duplicity or the wrong word?
Duplicating?
Thank you, of the jobs that you're doing in that regard? Because it's changed recently, or I don't know how many boards ago, where now you vote on each warrant issue, which you didn't do in the first part of the charter, right?
Boards
It was
have had
only-
a hard time with what it's supposed to do with the warrant.
Right.
What the original charge of the Board of Selectmen was, and again, I don't think this necessarily means that a board can't do something different, but the necessary thing is to place an article on the warrant. Now, that in itself can be political, but that's different than saying you're recommending it.
Right.
That's saying,
different
should it
than-
see the light of day?
Right.
Yes.
So if you could think of that, if, you know, not to put you on the spot now, but, you know, if you see, or if you think of anything, any conflict now that jumps out at you,
You know, I think that I appreciate the work that the Finance Committee does on the warrant. You know, I think that when it comes to the overall hearing process for the warrant, they probably vet out the warrant. In my opinion, they vet it out better than the Board of Selectmen does. I mean,
Oh, I
just
know they
from,
do.
you know, I mean, you hold very
That's the charge.
strongly to
That's-
holding.
But
right,
that is the
exactly.
charge. That's the
Right,
difference in the
And-
charges.
And so in that aspect, I don't think that it, I don't see the duplication, in a sense. We make a recommendation, and you all make a recommendation, but I think it's important for the town to get a different, you know, I think it allows them a different perspective, because, I mean, even recently, I mean, the board's been unfavorable, finance has been favorable. It hasn't always gone the same way, because I think that the view of the individuals and the way that they're looking at it is differently. The one thing that I have heard is consistently come up is, why does FinCom have to weigh on, like, the bylaws? Or, you know, issues that are outside of the financial realm. So that may be a consideration. But I wouldn't broadly say that they shouldn't rule on none of the bylaws. Because I think that in even some of the zoning bylaws, depending on how they're worded, they could have financial impact that I think could be beneficial for FinCom to weigh in on.
well, and your charge is not to have a public hearing or on each warrant article, which is different than what the FinCom has to do.
Right.
Correct, yes. Thank you for
But
distinguishing that. But, you know, as far, we'll still have people come in and explain to us what their
Exactly.
intent is with the different articles.
Mary Pat, I'd like to add one thing to that, because I've observed between the Board of Selectmen, particularly in the town manager, the discussion of who's able to put an article on the warrant. Like, for example, if you go into the Article 2, Section 7, it talks about initiation of warrant articles. Now, any elected official, like, for example, the town monitor, no elected official like yourself, because you're part of a multi-member body, and it says multiple member body. But we have had in the past, or any 10 certified voters for the annual, or 200 for the special. How do you feel about that? Because there's been some discussion in the past of, should department heads be able to submit a warrant article? Should other folks that aren't described here be able to submit? Talk to us about that.
That's a tough one.
I actually,
That's a real tough one.
That's why
I don't think,
That'd be the answer.
okay, right off the top of my head right now, given some of the things that have happened, I don't think a department head should be able to automatically have a warrant article put on the warrant. Well, because in the process, it's the town manager's budget. And they have come before, you know, there has been a process where the town manager and the department heads have gone through and they've set a budget. And this is what the budget is. And, you know, if they haven't done a good case of selling to the town manager the concerns over the budget, and it has been, you know, reviewed with FinCom, and it's been reviewed with the Board of Selectmen, and then to have a department head decide, well, I don't like what everybody else said. I want another $30,000, so I'm going to write a warrant article, and I'm just going to show up on town meeting floor and push for my warrant article. You know, to me, that's, well, what's the then why did we have the process to put in place to have somebody come back in the backside?
But why do the department heads come before FinCom if it's the town, if the finance director's budget? Should we eliminate that? And this is, again, I don't mean
They
to
do.
Well,
get
you
too
know,
far into different areas because a
No.
lot of it's FinCom, but do you know what, like, why does FinCom go through the excruciating trouble of listening to every department and have everybody come in and say their piece?
you know, and that's a,
I've been to this.
Excellent, excellent.
I mean, I don't know what the answer is. or
well,
if
you
there
know,
is.
but here's
Tradition.
the situation, in the overall budget,
Departmental. It's just trying to get a clearer, the overall budget is something the town manager should be able to speak to, but specificity around, what 3 trucks are being bought for the fire department, or what 2 trucks are being bought for the, DPW highway, that's something the department head should be able to sort of speak to and have a better knowledge. Should have satisfied the town manager that they know what they're talking about, but should have a better knowledge why that particular vehicle is the vehicle that's being purchased.
I think the committee feels like that it's actually being presented by the town official. In other words, the chief or the police chief or what have you. And in that presentation, again, it's more like they're relying on the subject matter experts because these are the guys that put the budget together. These are the folks that put those numbers together. And unfortunately, the people that don't have the institutional knowledge about what the department does, they should be there as a resource so that they can be asked questions, like you said, if there is an issue that's brought forward. And again, essentially, the charter states that the finance department and town manager present the budget. And ultimately, they may not be that familiar with all the nuances as you ask questions, and everybody might have a question here. Is it another forum to discuss the merit of that approach? That's what's happened with this.
Yep.
Is it the right place for that to occur? No. That's just my take on it. The merits have been discussed several times prior to getting to that status, and prior to getting to the approval by the selectmen, town
They know the
meeting.
finance committee.
And again, that faith has to be placed in the person and the confidence and the credibility that goes with that system, right up straight through to the town manager. That's the way
Different
that this is
administrations have
drafted.
handled it different ways. To use put it at the state level, Governor Romney pretty much shut down department heads from talking directly with legislators. Almost everything had to go directly to the governor's office. Most governors, whatever side of the aisle, have allowed ample, clear communication between legislators and at least commissioners, if not even people that are junior commissioners. So, again, people do it different ways. So here, what you'd hope is that the town department head that's in front of the finance committee is merely giving detail, not, playing a shell game, which I'm sure none have ever done.
And it's in the big
Never
picture
sounds like
approach.
that.
And it's in the big picture
Yeah,
approach.
yeah.
but
That's what.
maybe the timing needs to be readjusted. I mean, I think that it's, because right now the warrant is open right now, and it's going to close next Friday. And the FinCom is going to have the hearings after the fact, after the warrant is set for the particular articles. Here's a thought. What if the hearings on the budget were to occur before the warrant is set for the Springtown meeting? So that if a department, here's the town manager's recommendation for the budget. He's spoken to the department heads about it. FinCom is ultimately, the overseer of the budget, even though it's the town manager's budget. You all are vetting whether or not, isn't this how it's supposed to, you're vetting whether or not this is really fiscally the best position for the town, based on the recommendation of the town manager. So to be able to hear from the town manager on him saying why this is my best budget, and for the department heads to have the opportunity to agree, I may not like my number, but this is how I'm going to spend my money. For all of that to occur before the budget is actually set on that warrant, wouldn't that better serve the town?
That should be what's happening.
So in other words, are you suggesting that perhaps maybe the budgets ought to look like revenue-based budgets? In other words, if you know what your revenue is, because what you'll wrestle with is, well, you get the governor's budget, then you get the house budget, then you get the cherry sheet, then you get the final. I don't know what it is gonna be, and maybe in June we'll figure it out. If we don't get it for July, then maybe we'll have to think about what we're gonna do between now and November. And that's really pretty much what's happening, or is it?
Yeah,
Pretty much.
and here's another thing that's throwing a whole nother loop into it. If my understanding was correct, we were cited by the Attorney General
Right.
because you only can have one annual town meeting. You can't have a spring town meeting and a fall town meeting. So the town meeting in the fall now is a special. You only have one annual. So the fall town meeting will be still the fall town meeting, but it's gonna be a special town
Can you share
meeting.
with us that correspondence? 'Cause
We
that's
need
something
that
happened,
because
yeah.
that's in direct
That's-
violation to what the charter specifically.
And the charter was approved by,
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
all the people.
The AG must have approved all
Yeah,
this.
so they-
Time.
Well, all we
North
can
of
figure is
legislature.
with all the attorneys out of work.
Yeah, so in any
Who pays the
case, but
attorney?
again,
But- so we-
people
so-
change in AG's office too.
Right.
But please share that correspondence with us so that we can
Okay.
evaluate.
The town manager will be here tomorrow evening, so I'll make sure that he's,
And he'll be up next, so I think a good opportunity
Well,
when he
the- yeah,
comes
the
in
next, right.
is obviously to bring that information in because that's real important. as it's
if
specified.
I believe that was my understanding, is that the fall is gonna be considered the fall town meeting, but it's gonna be technically a special.
So that would be a change that we would make, obviously. But the, going back to another point that you made though, I can talk about what it was before we get to the.
The department heads being
Oh,
able to.
yeah, the budget, I believe, as somebody said on the original charter commission, that the intent was that, and I guess I want to be clear about what I think is supposed to happen, and then obviously maybe something else happens, but what's supposed to happen is the town manager is supposed to know what that budget's supposed to be, and that any representation by department head after the budget has been developed is supposed to only add detail, clarity, and so forth, not advocacy.
Correct,
The other
but
thing
that's-
is-
right, but
I
that's
may be
not,
naive, but that's,
Realize the purpose
that's
of
the
why
idea.
department heads can't submit warrant articles.
Yeah, exactly.
Go on town meeting floor and fight to
Exactly.
counteract
Right.
the
but
budget.
we've seen that, I mean,
Exactly.
last year was a perfect example.
There you
We
go.
told, I believe it was the library,
Right.
the instance
Yeah.
this is all you can have.
Yep.
And then they came through it may have been through the library trustees.
That's right.
And
There's a library trustees, there's a council on aging. there's-
Right, and they come forward and they submit for additions, and then as the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee, under our agreement with how much is supposed to go into stabilization and planning for this, it's, honestly, we're sweating next
But
week.
you're
Because who's
highlighting,
gonna
you're
come
highlighting
forward
one of
and
the
want to attack the
nuances
budget?
in our form of government is that we have both appointed and sometimes elected committees, and they have a department head. But yet, we still want everything to go through. What we try to do in terms of tightening up on the school committee in this charter was to have the school committee have deadlines as to when they have to at least produce their stuff, because under our current form of government, and I'm not trying to start any kind of problem here, but under our current form of government, the school committee has ample independent authority as on a town form of government that's operated like we are by a Board of Selectmen. In a mayor form of government, oftentimes what you see, whether it's a city or a town that's adopted a mayor form of government, is you see the mayor serve as the chairperson of the school committee. So one clear connection is that the mayor has a say in the school budget as well. I'm not saying that means we should go there or not go there, but that one we expected. We saw that when we did the charter, that we're not going to get around that. I don't know that we necessarily wanted to, but it was a clarity. School committee has certain rights under state law to bring their own budget forward if they have to, if they feel that the town has made it so impossible for them to meet their educational goals. So that we knew. The other things, you'll notice that again, the DPW commissioners were voided, they were gone. The board now serves in that role. So we thought that was wise, to not have such a large piece of the budget operated by another commission. But there are still vestiges of that, certainly Council of Aging and so forth, where, the idea was, why do we need to take everything down? Well, we don't need to take everything down. Well, sometimes there's still going to be these pieces there, because these multi-member boards do have access to the warrant.
Yeah, in essence, then, I guess it leads to, if we're looking at this in the entirety, when they try to separate this out, in the original charter, there's the legislative branch of government, which is obviously town meeting, who are the appropriating authorities within the community, then the executive form of government, which is what now the town manager and, in essence, you guys are. How do you wrestle with the fact that if this whole budget process plays out the way it's intended to through the town manager and through the warrants, on and on and on, and the appropriating authority, be it town government, comes in, votes through town meeting, and when it comes to you, you really got to make the determination as whether or not you authorize the expenditures of the appropriations that were made at town meeting. Is this helping you to that extent? Or is it hindering you to that extent? And when I speak to you, I also speak to you in concert with the town manager or you individually. Where is the fine line, if there is one there?
I think when the initial design of the charter was not to clearly define every step of that process and to allow the traditions that have existed in our community to continue in the way that we were, so that the voters were educated on every nuance of government as we could present it. So they had an opportunity on town meeting floor to visit these areas. As you remember, in the past, when we were younger, each line item was discussed at town meeting as we went to approve a budget. We wanted to take the bulk of that away and streamline that so that there was some confidence in the ability of our managers to manage. But we still needed to incorporate a faction that would allow voters to establish enough information to weigh in that situation properly at town meeting, to have sufficient. It's not a bad thing to have the town department's head comes in and speak about their budgets, because it may not be for your edification, because your confidence exists with the town manager and the finance director for their ability to get the job done. But the voter doesn't know that. The voter doesn't have that opportunity to interact with the town manager, with the town officials.
Public hearing.
So ultimately, it is an advertisement of what we're doing. When you look at the big picture. Sometimes those dynamics get mumbled up, when we allow that conveyance of authority to transpire in those public meetings where they actually think, because of the tradition that used to exist in this community, where the department head would get on the town meeting floor and defend the budget. It's kind of taken that aspect away, and that's what the design of the charter was.
Right, and that's
And
one
as
thing
a
that's actually
community,
worked
we
a
haven't
little
let
better.
go of what that was.
I think it works
So getting
fairly
back,
well.
is
Yeah.
I really
Now
do.
or before?
Now.
It's
We've
a big
wrestled-
improvement
But
from
it
what it
doesn't
was
always work with all of them.
12 years ago.
and that's exactly the point.
It's like we have a, if the department head cannot bring forward a warrant article, then DPW, unless they can get the town manager or the board of selectmen to sponsor that article, the DPW doesn't have a chance to fight on town meeting floor. But Council on Aging, well, that gives the senior center a one-up,
Well,
and library trustees gives the library a one-up,
Well,
and the
anyone
school
can-
committee gives the school committee a
Don't
chance for
confuse
one-up.
that with a citizen's right at any time to amend the budget, to make a motion to amend the budget, right?
Right, but the chance, and that's where it would all be an equal and fair playing field, and I agree, I think that process is okay, but the chances are greater if, in getting something approved, if you have that department head who's come forward with that warrant article, through the board of selectmen or the town manager, but when they come through by the elective boards, when you see unfavorable by FinCom and unfavorable by board of selectmen, but it's come through one of these elected boards, then to me that's where it's out of kilter.
So I guess
It's not
then,
venting the process evenly.
in the process, because we've all been scolded to a point, and we've all been admonished to a point about the particular posting processes that are built in here. How it should be posted, when it should be posted, so we all get adequate notification. And in fact, the warrant is really a notification of the community. Here's what's coming, here's how it's coming, get ready for it.
Yep.
But every year when I watch, and I played a part in it myself, every year, oh, the town manager screwed up. Posting wasn't right. Oh, this notice wasn't right. This one doesn't have sufficient time. Oh, it wasn't by certified mail. Oh, it's delivered by email. On and on and on. I've watched it for 10 years. And I'm saying to myself, fundamentally, is it a problem with the specifics in the charter that make it cumbersome? Or is it that people just don't want to follow what the original frame is put in? That's my question.
Well, people don't want to follow it, or don't read it.
Well, I think that's the section in the charter that speaks to, we went around on and on this one point, maybe we fixed it, the part about the allowing for anything other than certified mail. Didn't we fix that at one of the last town meetings, now that I think about it? We changed the language on that one area because Howard Fortner kept on bringing it forward, that the notification to one of the departments had to be through the mail versus email.
Personally delivered to every member.
Right.
Mary Pat, you were there when we went
Nothing
through.
like to have a police officer show at your house.
Who's the constable, and they're coming on down.
You know, I think that those are sections that, you know, to make it easier given the lines of communication that we use today. But I agree with Bruce. As far as the other, I don't see it's cumbersome. Just people just are upset because they didn't follow it and they're putting blame somewhere else.
And is the reason why it's not being followed too technical, too detailed, too cumbersome? Or is it that we just gotta do what we gotta do?
We just have to do what we have to do.
Just gotta do it.
So, I guess you answered my question.
I mean, the only thing that I saw with trying to set the special town meeting that we were trying to set in February, although I think there was an issue with the newspaper posting.
Right.
We wanted to, you know, having to post it in and I don't remember the language directly, but trying to get the posting to the newspapers, that timeline there. It was like, well, if we posted in the Pawtucket Call with that qualifier, you know, there was some, so given the opportunity now, the only thing I would question is with the different forms of way of communicating, is the source of a newspaper to announce the warrant the best avenue of communication? Or could it be a choice of, you could do, you know, putting it on the town website, putting it on the town bulletin board as a better source than having to pay to put it in the newspaper? And, you know, and I know there'll be an argument from one citizen who says, I don't have the internet. And I'm sure there are other citizens out there that do not have the internet, but not everybody gets the newspaper either. So that's the only thing as far as the posting requirement. Is the newspaper in today's day and age the best source to announce it?
Perhaps that's a real discussion that we engage in when it comes time to interview the town clerk, who has statutory positions relative to, and as I've seen, substantial changes taking place in postings and meetings and minutes and all the things that...
Right, with all the open meeting law changes.
So maybe that's an area where we can really gather some information to assist the board to make sure that the proper procedures and policies are adhered to, because we may not have the flexibility to say we want it. Maybe it is what it is because that's the way it needs to be. I'm not sure.
I'd like to touch on one of the subjects you brought up, though. When we abolished the DPW commission, that obviously had a pretty hefty impact. When we talked about sewer expansion, that took a whole character of authority and or basically job knowledge that the Board of Selectmen didn't possess. And it put that realm of responsibility right in their lap. And we talked about what rates were going to be set and how that process was going to be defined. And even down to the definition of one man's job, trimming trees. How do you think we can best solve the issue that was presented there by the lack of subject matter knowledge that existed in that environment and that incapacity to make a decision? Would it be better to have a functional DPW commission, or do you think it's adequately served by the Board of Selectmen?
I think we'd be better off having a DPW commission, because we're not brought up to speed on anything from water and sewer.
I didn't mean to paint the picture that
No, we're not.
but
Well, it's,
just highlighting a problem that, you know, that happened in the past.
I know, Peter, I look at it, and one of the things we were careful here, we wanted to be forward-looking. And we had a very strong individual, as you said there, and I know when they did abolish the DPW commissioners, although now I have a better understanding of some of the reason. There was a good point Artie brought up in leveling the playing field as to who can present articles at town meeting is a good point. The board was somewhat of a rubber stamp. We were fortunate we had a very skilled and well-qualified public works director. I thought at the time it was a good idea to abolish it. It served its time. Well, I found something worse, and that's no stamp. And that's no, nothing on them, but they're just echoing what was brought out. DPW commission is one of the few parts of the charter that has been challenged on town meeting floor. I didn't agree with the reasons it was brought forward, sat quiet. Artie got up and quite eloquently said, there's a provision in the charter, at 10 years we'll review it, and at that point we can go forward, and that's what we're in the process of now. And I know my questions to them is saying, how comfortable do they feel? Do they feel prepared to deal with these issues? And with DPW, there are really three components of that. Their water and sewer commission is somewhere along in this process, highway just disappeared. And I think we've seen the long-term result of that in the fiasco of street acceptances. So it's just, I'm kind of curious what your feelings were, and Artie, when you kind of initiated this, Artie and Harry have both been water and sewer commissioners. They currently are, and do you think it works? Do you think we can improve it?
When it's interesting, because when you said the DPW commissioner, the first thing that came to mind on the onset was water and sewer. And when you're talking about the water and sewer commissioners, I think that it's important that that board should make up the ratepayers. And actually, I don't know if you all are aware of it, but I believe we're getting a warrant article, citizens warrant article for the Springtown meeting, trying to put through that the only ones who can vote on water and sewer issues are ratepayers at town meeting.
Petition article
It's a-
was submitted.
Yeah, it's a petition article being submitted, and looking back over the actions of town meeting in the past and where we're at, I can see a valid reason why, if you're not a ratepayer, to weigh in on whether or not the ratepayers should buy $1 million, improvement. It's like me going to the grocery store and, buying something when I don't have to pull out my credit card, saying, well, I want that and that and that, but I'm not going to pay for it. So, it's easy for, so I can see that. So as far as my point is from the Board of Selectmen, I have felt that the information provided to us since I had been on the board, the briefings that we've had, whether it was from the tree warden position or from the water and sewer point of view, or from the street point of view, especially with the highway and the street acceptances. That's the part, if let me go back for a second. If you're talking about water and sewer, it may be better served not to be sitting with the Board of Selectmen, because we are not all ratepayers, and I think that water and sewer commissioners should be ratepayers. But when you're talking about a DPW commissioner and you're talking about, now you're getting into road acceptances, that is a duty of the Board of Selectmen. So to separate that out, especially what we've seen, all of our problems with the road acceptances are from the past. These were problems that were created when you probably had the DPW
That's covered by
commissioner.
master and law, and we can't separate that out. But
You know, but you understand, I mean, that's a full, I can't imagine.
But when you're talking about
Adding
the
another layer in
DPW
that.
structure, it doesn't totally exist on enterprise accounts that are established by the ratepayers. There is a taxpayer contribution to that function. When they go out and buy trucks, they don't come out of the enterprise account. There is a contribution that every taxpayer should weigh in on in some way, shape, or form. It's just that is the decision-making process being served by the Board of Selectmen is basically what I'm looking at, adequately to support confidence, voter confidence when they make those decisions.
Well, I guess just to clarify, when it comes to the water and sewer, the water and sewer trucks are paid for by the water and sewer department. So are the salaries.
Highway department, they're all merged in functions, different functions. They trade
they're
employees. The employees go back and forth. I don't
Well,
debate
But those
that.
account-
The minutia
right,
of
no,
all
no,
that.
They
Yeah,
are
but-
charged,
'cause
right? Even a percentage of the salary, all the salaries that are associated are charged to that. So the ratepayers are burdening the cost of water and sewer, and the portion that applies to a portion of the actual supervisors' positions, clerical, all of that's charged to the ratepayers for the portion that is distributed to water and sewer.
But they're all merged functions, what I'm saying. The highway department.
They're only a merged
takes-
function now
takes-
because of the shortage of the
And
personnel.
it exists. It existed prior to the shortage of personnel. It's happened since even before that the sewer commissions were abolished. We had that merger that was already occurring. The idea here is we didn't totally separate those functions. The charter didn't define that because we left that up to the selectmen to decide how they were going to do that, because that intrusion exists. Because we do have purchases that are made at the highway department that don't come out of the enterprise accounts. And whether or not that is a functional business, really, and it's a self-supporting entity, is not really a discussion that we're concerned with. It's whether or not the selectmen feel they can weigh in on the decisions that need to be made and not have that be a burden with everything else that's going on in your policy setting
Do
agenda.
you
I
feel
don't
you're
see-
adequately prepared to make decisions? Do you have, and
That's
Mike-
not-
Yes.
Mike Pataski, I'll use him as an example, one time, and the board voted 5-0 at that town meeting, and they were in favor of reforming public works commissioners, and his words were that the information that was involved was too technical in nature for the board to justify adequate time to it. And I'm just wondering, do you feel that way?
I feel that way. We have things we get on the water and the sewer, but it's still way over your head. Yeah, it should be done by professionals, not a board of selectmen.
Well, let's look at the word professional. Keep in mind again that DPW commissioners in the new iteration could either be elected or appointed. They will be citizens. Some will sometimes have
No,
ample experience, but not necessarily. It's
Some
not,
will-
Right.
But they'll have to know some things.
they'll have more time to look at
Right.
it, but they won't necessarily be all engineers.
Don't we expect that expertise from the DPW director?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, the thing is.
So we need to not
yeah.
romanticize too much a notion of a commission that's not the Board of Selectmen, because they're gonna be ordinary citizens too.
I mean, I guess my concern with the commission, especially given the issue of their street acceptances and the fact that the selectmen have to lay out the streets. So there's an amount of knowledge, and, we probably know more now about street acceptances than we ever wanted to. But, my concern is, and I'm not sure at what point the whole idea of the street acceptances went awry, and whether the DPW commissioners were involved in that process or not, I don't know that answer.
They
But
made the recommendations, but this by authority.
you know, over 20
represented
years.
town
Most of the
meeting
planning.
and that whole process.
I kind of
Most of the
misspoke when
subdivisions
I
being
said
approved.
street
Okay.
acceptances and highway. Street acceptances, really the DPW should only be involved in street acceptances in terms of making sure that the roadway is constructed properly, any utilities there are properly. The current DPW director, and this is only my opinion, got brought into the street acceptance process because of the failure of the planning board, who really should have been overseeing this process. But that's neither here nor there. So it's street acceptances is really a small part of it. But it's really the level of technical expertise. And I don't think I'm not really looking for somebody, you know, that knows engineer. There's really, like they said, there's no way for DPW to go and bring something forward. You can say the department head, but we went from having, you know, the management structure of 5 members of management down to 2. We've got a DPW director now with a 1.5 years experience that replaced a very strong person who, with the other people that have been eliminated, has 75 years of institutional knowledge. So now what's occurred is the town manager's priorities have become the DPW director's priorities, and that's not always in the best interest of the community.
Absolutely.
And-
And I want to be clear, I'm not necessarily, and for one thing, again, I'm going to say again, we're not tonight supposed to be solving the big
I know.
questions of the universe. So I don't know in the end if some kind of a DPW commission needs to be reestablished, but I do want to always remind ourselves that in most of our committees, including boards of selectmen, that we're ordinary citizens. So whether we're talking about Board of Health, Council of Aging, DPW commissioners, and all that, so we just need to be careful, not so much about the notion of wouldn't it be nice to divide up the workload, because that may be, that answer could be yes, but we also then have to add to that, that we're not always sure who's going to be in any one committee at any given time. We've been very fortunate in this town, I want to be clear that, you know, not to have my comments be misconstrued, that we've been very fortunate that volunteers that have been on virtually any one of these committees, I could name probably 36 people, and it might be a different 36 people than anybody else would name, that have done exemplary work on these committees at various times over my lifetime. So it doesn't matter that not everybody's an engineer, not everybody's a doctor that serves on this committee or that committee. The point of the matter is citizens get in and do great work. My only caveat I want to throw at this is that by the recreation of something like this, we're going to be looking at also people having learning curves. That's all I'm saying. To just put that out there, that, you know, the people that did the great work on that commission 10, 14, 15 years ago, they're probably not going to be available to us right now. Some of them are still great people and living. I'm not saying they're not here, but I'm saying it's a new thing.
Recreation might not be the correct term. Reinvention, you know, it doesn't necessarily, maybe something somewhere in between. And sharing the workload, I think,
That's,
you know,
laudable.
DPW oversees the largest assets that this town has. You know, we look at it, the high school, we're building that $43 million. The utilities we have under the streets, the roadways themselves are really the biggest asset. And really, we've kind of dumped it onto another board. So your work sharing is right. And it's, you know, and I was just interested to see if they think that, you know, maybe somebody sharing that workload with them, which is how you brought it up, and having their finger, you know, their finger on the pulse.
I think too, Jim, that one of the things that I think that we as a group, we're not here to disqualify or qualify. I think that what we're ultimately going to do is offer to the citizens all the recommendations that we make based on all this input. And ultimately, it's up to citizens whether or not they're going to vote it in at whatever elections and or town meetings, because that's really the process here. So I think that's so important. And one thing I want to do, I know the hour is 9 o'clock. I said to the group that we would take input until 9 o'clock. Barry was not feeling well tonight. He's been gracious enough to take care of us tonight. I appreciate that. So I would.
We're going to keep you longer.
Yes. Being the diplomat that I want to be, I want to ask the group if the group wants to continue on through their questions. How do you all feel?
was great
I
discussion.
guess I would just, I mean, with one caveat, that is there anything else that these two
Sure.
would like to share with us that are on their minds about the charter?
Well, I think you should, one thing I think you should do, you know, probably it's just a little thing, is change the date on it.
The date.
From having it reviewed in
Oh, the
zero
zero
to
instead
make
of
it
having
the two.
10
Make
more
it,
years out to make it in 2? Is
make
that-
it, make it 2.
Yeah, so you're saying 10 years
10
hence,
years from
not
now,
8
it'll be
years.
2012.
Okay. Okay. Karen?
With the last discussion point that we were on, the one thing that kind of just keeps coming in my head is creating, whether it be a DPW commission or another committee or board or, you know, commission that you may be reviewing through this process. The one thing that we see as a problem is that we're having difficulty having citizens fill these positions. So when you're looking at the charter, really, you know, which committees and commissions do we really honestly need in our town? And is there, you know, are there any that are not serving the function well for the town that we could possibly eliminate? And are there others that we seriously need? And I don't know if you're all aware of it, but just the Cable Review Committee. I mean, the Board of Selectmen, we ended up taking back some of their charge because they could not make they never had a quorum for 6 months. So, you know, if we're not gonna have the citizens that are gonna come forward to sit on these committees and commissions and boards, then how functional can they be if they can't have quorums? So kind of, you know, I just ask you to keep that in mind and really, you know, in establishing the size of a board and how many we have, think about that right now, and this may only be a low point, but our volunteerism is extremely low right now, and we have a lot of committees and chairs that are barely functioning.
And one final thought that I want to encourage both of you to encourage the 3 members of the board that aren't here is we've set up an email address, and it's towncharter@uxbridge-ma.info. We're going to encourage folks, and I'm going to ask Barry if he can list that somehow on a header for us, to encourage folks to utilize that through email for those folks that can't get here, and certainly you all along the way, if you think of something and you've got the citizens' input, which both of you are obviously citizens as well, in addition to using that website, please send us all the thoughts that occur after tonight. And you're most welcome to come back at any time. I really, really want to thank you for coming tonight. You've been most helpful, and we appreciate your input. We're head out.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think I said Charter Review Committee. I meant to say Cable Advisory Committee, just because you all are the Charter Review Committee. Sorry. But thank you for having.
Thank you. What I'd like to do is first of all, before we finish up, I'd like to go to our next agenda item, which is discussion of schedule of meetings. The group had asked me to go forward and put together what ought to be a reasonable meeting agenda. I've taken the liberty to do that. It's obviously in draft form at this point. Nothing has been submitted to anybody until the board approves whatever changes and/or. So there is one typo on it, and it's on the May 18th, which I put down police chief, fire chief, DPW director, and capital planning committee. Essentially, they are the capital planning committee. So it should say /capital planning committee. Just a small thing, but I just wanted to point that out.
So that's the only mistake we'll find if we...
Well, there's a couple more. Who's going to get a free coffee with we haven't decided whom yet, if they can pick the next one up.
Given that Harry has offered full disclosure about the one mistake he made on this, I would ask the committee to approve this schedule to go forward.
Second.
Is there any further discussion?
I just have one question, and it could find it
probably, you know, under the citizens' input, and one group that we really aren't seeing in here is people who have held offices in the past, but during the period of the charter. And I really, I don't know, it'd be the committee's feelings on it. Do you feel that that citizens forum is adequate for those people?
I think so. I think the only, I think what we might want to do is if we feel like the 21st, 5th, 19th, or the 2nd, you know, prior to the final deliberation, we could open it up at that point too. You know, post a specific invitation to anyone that has not come before us yet. That's a good point.
Any other further discussion on the schedule? All in favor?
All right.
Aye. Thank you very much. Next agenda item is to approve our minutes. Thank you very much, Bill. Appreciate you, as we indicated, sending these out by email, so we all have an adequate chance to look at them and come here prepared. So thanks, Bill. Appreciate that. Has everyone had a chance to review those minutes? Are there any corrections? I'll accept the motion for approval.
Motion.
Is there a second to that?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Okay. And basically, just setting the forum for the meetings. I thought maybe just a one ground rule. If we're going to set from 7 to 7:15 the citizens forum, I thought one additional rule with the road. I think we perhaps ought to think about putting in there, assuming we get a fair amount of citizens that come in. Perhaps establishing a time limit to make sure they're prepared to come in and not just let them ramble on. And I guess I can make that determination as to have they gone far enough, but are we comfortable with a 3 or 5 minute rule? Or is it 3 too little, is 5 too much? Is there any thoughts on that?
Your question just took 4 minutes.
I'm asking for
Process out, we really didn't have, you know, a set time limit for citizen forum. The floor is always open.
Okay.
We probably know a handful of people that really expressed a genuine concern there, as I remember in the past.
So I don't believe it'll be burdensome.
Okay.
That's just my position on
We
it.
play it by ear. If it starts to become a problem, then we.
Right.
I'll exercise my discretion as you all
Absolutely.
Yeah.
fortunately do.
Yep.
Okay, and then all our meetings will end at 9 o'clock. Only, I will ask for a motion if we're at 9 o'clock, if you want to continue, and if the group decides they want to continue, they'll call. If not, we're out of here at 9, but no later than 9:30. Whatever motion is, 9:30, we're out of here. Is everyone okay with that?
I'm good for
You're
midnight.
getting easier to deal with as you get older, Harry.
Okay. And I'll accept the motion for adjournment.
Mr. Chair, just real quick.
I'm sorry.
We do need to sign the minutes. in order
Yes.
to-
Oh, one copy,
So
yeah.
before you run, if you could just put your
Okay.
Jane hand copy at the bottom.
Artie made the motion to adjourn, Julie seconded, all in favor? Aye. Thanks once again.